Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the January 18th meeting of the MTD Board of Directors. It is our first meeting of the calendar year, so a belated Happy New Year to everybody on the board and out there in the public watching. A roll call of the Board of Directors. I will start with Director Sarkar.
Present.
Director Perotti.
Present.
Director McQuarrie.
Yes, here.
Director Lemberger.
Present.
Vice Chair Tabor. I saw him down there someplace, at least for now. We will count him as absent. And Chair Davis is here. We do have a quorum. And we will start with item 3, the report regarding the posting of the agenda. Christina, could I have the report on that, please?
There you go. Good morning. The agenda was posted on Friday, January 14th, 2022 at MTD's administrative office, mailed and emailed to those on the agenda list, and posted on MTD's website.
Great. Thank you very much. Item 4, this is a status report on the COVID-19 state of emergency. Staff is requesting that we consider whether state and local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. And they are recommending 2 items. 1, that we find that the MTD board has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency and the state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. And secondly, direct staff to continue to notice and hold hearings as remote hearings consistent with Government Code Section 54953, subsections E3. Staff, Jerry, you have any comments, requests, or direction on this?
No, just clarification that, this is something we'll probably be doing before every public meeting for the time being.
Yeah, what I see, at least as I saw in the law, we need to do it a minimum of every 30 days. I guess my only question is, what I saw was that the order right now goes through the end of March. So we're looking essentially to see what the governor and public health officials do on a month-to-month basis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. Okay. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone who wishes to speak under public comment?
I don't have any public comments at this time. Allow me 1 more minute to check. There we go. We're all set.
Okay, great. Okay, not having any public comment takes us back to the board. I'm looking for a motion to approve staff recommendations as I outlined previously verbally.
Motion to approve, Chair.
I have a motion to approve by Director Perotti. Is there a second? Second by Director Lemberger. A roll call on this. We will start with Director Sarkar.
I'll move to approve.
Director Perotti.
Aye.
Director McQuarrie. He's trying. I can see a thumb moving.
Aye. Sorry.
There you go. Director Lemberger.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tabor. Still absent. Chair Davis votes yes. The motion passes 5 with 1 absence. Great. Thank you for that. Okay, now that move us on then to the consent calendar. There are 2 items. First is the approval of the prior minutes for the meeting of December 7th, 2021. Item 5, the cash report. There are actually 3 items here. The cash reports for the dates of November 27th through December 10th, December 11th through December 24th, December 25th, 2021 through January 7th, 2022. comments or questions on either of those two items? Dr. Lemberger.
Yeah, this is a clarification and it relates to actually the general manager's report, but I wanted to get this clarified before approving the numbers. It says that there was 972,551 in local transportation funds based on revised claims from last October. So wondering if that is in these budgets and why, and because we have a local transportation fund November 2021 at 930,958. So just wanting some clarifications on that of where each of those are in relation.
Certainly.
Darren. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jared.
What I would do, I think what I'm referring to there in the general manager's report, my recollection was the state transit assistance, which is reimbursement for capital. But let me confirm that. What you typically see in the cash report are the monthly revenue, sales tax revenues that come in. So they are both under the TDA, LTF, but there are two different funds. But I'll want to get back to you and clarify that for certain, confirm.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on either the minutes or the cash report? Madam Clerk, is there anyone who wishes to speak under public comment on either of the consent calendar items?
I don't have any public comment at this time.
Great. I'm looking then for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll make the motion to approve the consent calendar.
Director Sarkar made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Director McCory made the second. Okay, roll call vote here on approval of the consent calendar. Director Sarkar,
Aye.
Director Prodi,
Aye.
Director McCory,
Aye.
Director Lemberger.
Aye.
Let the record show Vice Chair Tabor joined us at 8:35. Vice Chair Tabor
Yes.
and Chair Davis votes yes. The motion passes 6-0. That takes us to item 7. Item 7 is general public comment for items within our purview, not on our agenda today. Madam Clerk, is there anyone wishing to speak under general public comment?
No public comment.
Great. That will then move us into our first item of item 8, short range transit plan update. Mr. Estrada, you want to open this up?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm going to hand this off to Ms. Blackerby, our planning and marketing manager, to lead us through the discussion and introduce our guest. So Hillary, it's all yours.
Great. Hello, good morning, Chair and Board. With me again today is David Burbidge, our consultant from Stantec, who's been working on the short range transit plan project. And I'm going to share some slides, and then David and I are going to do kind of a tag team job here. So let me just get those up. Okay. So just a little bit of an intro. I think, as you know, we've come to you a few times on this. We get to this place from having been awarded a grant through the Sustainable Communities Planning Grant program through Caltrans to fund a new short-range transit plan. We've called our project MTD Moves Ahead. And so that's there's a lot of flyers, a lot of things online with that title and reference and everything. So we've been using that as sort of our branding for the project. We're going to walk you through today what we've done so far with regards to outreach, what people told us in our surveys, in our listening session, and then behind the scenes, David and his colleagues have been working on an existing conditions report, very thorough, and we're sort of collecting all the information, and now we're going to try to do something with it to get towards creating a plan. So with that, can pass it over to David to get us kicked off and let us know what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, board of directors. Good morning. As Hillary mentioned, the agenda is 4 key points that we want to go over is reviewing the scope and the timeline, discuss our initial findings from a lot of the listening session and engagement activities that we've done to date, some of the key findings that will be familiar to you, including some that we presented at the prior session that we've had with you all, and then some next steps and discussion. So the project scope is to develop a short-range transit plan for the next 5 years to guide service development, infrastructure investment, and capital needs, as well as engaging with community and customers, which we've taken a key step back in the fall. And we want to identify ways to adjust to a change pandemic-induced disruption. So the recovery has been ongoing, ridership has been growing again, but of course now we have a new variant. And so we got to, think of ways to adjust and be responsive to these disruptions, but as well as look at new innovative ways to deliver service, things that Santa Barbara has already started investigating and chart out ways to go forward on those things like microtransit, bus priority infrastructure, and looking at ways to better align service levels, service delivery with actual demand and travel behavior changes. And then that the development of the plan will align with the current strategic plan and lay the foundation for your next strategic plan, which is upcoming, I believe. And we're going to develop service strategies looking at new vehicle technology and the recently completed facilities master plan to really achieve that growth that will be necessary, given that your current facility is constrained and vehicles obviously are transitioning to zero emissions. So the approach is in these 6 basic steps, and we are at the current step where we're starting to draft the plan through development and design based on our existing conditions analysis and our stakeholder engagement round 1. Once we have a draft plan that we've settled on, we are going to present it to the public and stakeholder engagement round 2 to get feedback and comments from the public and stakeholders, and then revise and finalize the plan and present and adopt the final plan. So those are the key steps. The timeline looks as follows, where we had, I believe, our initial outreach with you all back in, I think it was in October. We had that first meeting. And then right now we're at the point where we're starting to develop the draft plan, some concepts. We have our presentation today to you all, and then we're going to do some outreach once we have that draft plan in the spring, and then finalize it as we move forward through the rest of the year. So one of the key things we want to talk about today is the feedback that we received through various engagement events that I think are really interesting, and I hope you find it interesting as well. The first was a virtual listening session that we held back in October. We had 37 participants at the live listening session, which was held online, and we had simultaneous interpretation going on, so it was inclusive. And then we had a survey period that lasted for, I want to say, 3 or 4 weeks, I believe, at the end of October into November. And we had over 300 completed surveys from riders and non-riders. Again, it was bilingual, so we had a inclusive approach. And this survey did a few different things, try to understand why folks are riding, why they aren't riding, what are their priorities on some trade-offs, and what are their thoughts on bus priority infrastructure. And so I'll start with the listening session highlights. And the way the evening proceeded was by reviewing the project scope and approach. We looked at trade-offs and transit planning tools. And then we started listening to participants about how they use MTD and whether they use MTD. We have some key highlights there on the right about where folks lived who attended, whether they were using transit, and whether they have access to a car. We discussed trade-offs and listened to feedback based on trade-offs in small group sessions. We had also a presentation on bus priority treatments and bus priority measures that MTD is interested in. And it was really to discuss what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what is working for folks, where do we want to go with this plan. So that was a very enlightening evening. We have some results from we had some live surveys after we showed the different trade-offs, and we can walk through them in the next slides. So for example, one of the key trade-offs we showed.
Sorry, one thing I wanted to mention, just if you can see on the right, we asked before we really kicked off, we had a few polling questions about where do people live, if they've used MTD in the past 3 years, they have access to a car, just to see kind of who we were talking to, who we were working with. So those results are there on the right. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah, thanks. So the trade-off questions we were working through was, the first one, it was looking at frequency and flexibility versus coverage and easy access, meaning, do you favor a frequent bus that comes very frequently, but may require you to walk a bit further to access that frequent bus, versus walking a short distance, but a bus that comes less frequently? And overall, the vast majority of participants favored that flexibility and frequency. So you might have to walk a bit further, but for a more frequent service. Similarly, the other trade-off that we looked at was faster trips, i.e. meaning you walk a bit further to a bus stop because the bus has fewer stops, so the bus moves faster and your trip overall is faster. Or do you want to walk or have a quicker access to your bus stop, but because there's so many bus stops, the bus is actually slower? And again, folks favored these faster trips, meaning that having more spread out bus stops or fewer bus stops could help improve service, and it's something that the participants were interested in. And then we had two other trade-offs that we looked at as well. And this one is a bit more evenly split, I would say, is whether folks favor having to connect between bus routes. So basically taking two buses to reach their final destination. And what this can do is make the overall travel time shorter, because the overall travel path is more direct, versus if you have a one-seat ride where the bus zigzags all over the place. Where it's a one-seat ride, it's convenient, but it might take you longer to get there. And folks favored this model of connecting between bus lines. And then the final one we looked at was something that's emerging across the industry, especially after COVID, is looking at this service delivery. Do we focus on that very peak commuter-based service, which some of it's been eroded because folks are maybe working from home that used to take transit? Or do we focus, or we try to spread our resources more evenly across the day, on weekends, midday, and night, to focus on providing service to folks who may be working non-traditional hours? And interestingly, the strong favor here was for that all-day service.
When we do talk to people about this, they want both.
Right, yeah.
They want strong peak service, and also in the middle of the day, and also in the evening, and also on the weekend. So no surprise there.
Right, so the key takeaways are broad support for a redesign focus on frequency, increasing bus speeds, and more service during off-peak hours. There were also strong support for priority measures like all-door boarding and bus-only lanes, which I'll get into. And then we had these small group discussions that were really fruitful. I think we had 4 or 5 different small groups that we had facilitators in, and it was really nice to hear from folks, really delving into their experience wanting to use the bus for more trips, but they lack frequency. For example, during the midday and on weekends, some concern over peak hour crowding, especially now with COVID. They were interested in this connection-based system, but obviously wary about missing transfers and how that can disrupt their whole journey. And there was excitement overall for microtransit that we also touched on in terms of the pilot that's upcoming. Yeah, I'll switch to the online survey, which asked a lot of the same questions, and we got a pretty robust sample here of survey respondents. 247 people identified as riders, 16 people identified as non-riders. The top reasons why people weren't riding or saying they don't use MTD is because the bus trips are too long, they just have a preference for driving, or the bus doesn't serve where they live or need to travel to. The top reasons for riding MTD was, interestingly, it reduces carbon footprint and it's good for the environment. That was the top reason. That the bus actually is available at their home or at the destinations that they're traveling to on the bus, and they prefer a car-free or car-light lifestyle. So MTD is really filling that need of sustainability and car-free living. Again, we asked the same sort of trade-off questions, and here in red is the rider responses, and in orange or yellow is the non-rider responses. So similar trends, interestingly, with the freedom and flexibility based on frequency, the rider response was stronger than the non-rider response versus the coverage and easy access. But overall, the support, again, was trending towards that. I'm willing to walk a bit further if it means my bus is coming more frequently. Same thing on the second trade-off where, again, the favor response was, I'm willing to walk a bit further if it means my bus stops less frequently and it's a faster trip versus I'd rather walk to a closer bus stop and the bus stops very frequently and it's a slower ride overall. So similar to what we heard again in the outreach. This is where it diverged a bit more, where it was more evenly split again between the having to transfer or connect between bus routes versus no connection, that one seat ride. This was a bit more evenly split than in the listening sessions, but still, again, a bit more favored towards that ability to transfer or connect towards buses for quicker or shorter overall travel time for your trip. And the peaked versus all day service, again, this was more split than at the listening sessions. With interestingly, the riders favoring a bit more the all day service and the non-riders thinking a bit more about the peaked service. And then part of the survey, we presented different bus priority measures, including bus stop balancing, all-door boarding, bus only lanes, and I'll get into them. Bus stop balancing is the idea, and it's related to one of the trade-offs of having fewer bus stops, which means you might have to walk a bit further, but the trade-off or the benefit there is a faster bus trip. And so when we look at support across riders and non-riders, you see that an overwhelming majority either somewhat or strongly support this bus stop balancing approach.
Yeah, and in case it's kind of hard to see on these bars, these graphs, there's on the right-hand side, the dark green is strongly support, the dark blue is somewhat support, the light blue in the middle is don't know, and then the green and blue to the left are somewhat opposed and strongly opposed. So you can kind of see them. If the ones on the right are bigger, those were more popular items.
Exactly. So you see those dark blues and the dark greens being very high for the bus stop balancing for all door boarding, which could be particularly effective at bus stops and transit centers, as well as for services that use the 60-foot articulated buses to really speed up loading and unloading. So those are strongly supported across riders and non-riders as well. Also, when we look at transit signal priority and queue jump, which tend to work together, which is basically giving the bus the ability to bypass traffic through a short lane rearrangement, as well as a transit signal priority at the signal, which would give the bus the ability to bypass the traffic, go first, and then not get stuck in the vehicle traffic. So again, those dark green and the dark blue on the far right there for both transit signal priority and queue jump interventions strongly supported by riders and non-riders alike. And then when we look at bus only lanes, which tend to be, which have a high impact in terms of speeding up buses because only buses can drive in them, no cars can drive in them. And this is what agencies across the country have seen really impact and speed up their buses. There was, again, on the right here, we shifted it around, but again, dark green and dark blue support from riders and non-riders. Interestingly, I strongly support more so from the riders than non-riders, which is probably to be expected, because this means carving out a vehicle lane for buses only, either for most of the day, part of the day, etc.
I will say though, I mean, I found the results with the non-riders kind of surprising in that it's like, in theory, a lot of those non-riders probably drive cars. And to see that 57% of them support, designating space for buses, I think was a positive thing. I can handle this. So we had a couple sort of free answer questions in our survey about, where do we not currently serve that you'd like to see service? These were just a few that folks said. So the Islamic Center of Santa Barbara, which has been is newly built over the last couple of years. It's in Goleta at the corner of Kyriel and Los Carneros at the roundabout. That's one place. Carpinteria, just generally looking for more service or to bring back service. Goleta Amtrak Station, Cathedral Oaks, and then, of course, State Street and the waterfront. So some of these are, we had service there, but it's suspended. Some is it's been harder to get there. I will say the Goleta Amtrak and the Islamic Center are actually both in our microtransit zone. So when that does come, and we've been in communication actually with the folks from the Islamic Center to let them know that. Obviously, we're just waiting to have enough workforce to bring that microtransit service into being. But these are some of the areas that people requested. I can speak a bit to this, David. So we did an operator survey. We obviously wanted to ask the bus operators because they know the system pretty much better than anyone. And so we asked them very similar questions to the surveys that we asked the public. You know, we asked them what they thought, and we asked them what they think is important to our passengers. And then also some more sort of insidery operational questions. So they said that reliability and safety at bus stops were likely the chief concerns for riders. They had a list to choose from, I think to pick 3 from. And then top concerns for service delivery, operator availability, certainly we're seeing that, safety and security, and then adequate layover facilities, so places to park bus in between trips or, you know, on breaks and things like that. Regarding those trade-offs we showed you, they mostly align with riders, except operators preferred the peak service, or basically said that peak service was more important than the spreading the service across the day, which is interesting. And then for the priority measures, they, no surprise, supported a lot of those measures except for all-door boarding. So yeah, so we saw some different input on that. And I know some of those concerns are based on being able to sort of police what's going on with people boarding for fares and things like that. David, did you want? Yeah.
Hillary, do you want questions from the board as we go, or do you want to hold it to the end?
Why don't we, if we can, hold us to the, yeah, Jerry is waving.
Yeah, on this measure, as I pointed out to Ms. Blackberry, I do want to comment.
Yeah.
Number one, I do appreciate our employees' input, and the opportunity is absolutely necessary. But I wanted to clarify for the board as pertains to safety, in particular bus stop safety, which I think is where all-door boarding probably was a sensitive topic for our bus operators. That a big part of that is going to be a part of the Public Transit Agency safety plan that's being led by our operational team and our safety officer, the implementation of that. So while this particular effort is really about our service, and obviously there's overlap between those, rightfully so, I wanted to clarify that, you know, anything related to safety is going to be really led through the Public Transit Agency plan.
Yeah, that kind of was my question on, that was my question was, how does this relate to the public safety plan? So you kind of answered that there.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't have too many more slides, Dave, if we can get through those.
Go ahead. We'll get through and then we'll come back for questions.
David, did you have anything to add on the operator survey?
No, I don't.
So we did additional stakeholder outreach. So obviously in a lot of what we're talking to the public about, we're talking about these priority measures, and that involves right of way of cities in the county. And we don't have control over those as a transit district, you know, unfortunately. We can't just bring a bucket of paint out into the roadway and draw the lines however we want. So we did, David and I had some meetings with various people from these different entities. So SBCAG, UCSB, Goleta, Santa Barbara County, Carpinteria, Santa Barbara, and Easy Lift, really talking, especially to the jurisdictions of cities and county, about what they're seeing in the future. So talking to sort of their development folks, so who's dealing with housing, who's dealing with development patterns, what's changing in their jurisdiction, what's coming up. Then also talking about the right of way, how can we work together to prioritize transit, the people on the bus. A lot of times people think about these sort of in the abstract. They're like, oh, it's about getting the bus through a corridor faster, but really it's about getting the people on the bus through the corridor faster, right? To give them a better experience and better quality of life. And then also with climate action plans and things like that, a lot of the jurisdictions are grappling with that to see how they can help to reduce the largest contributor of GHG emissions, which is the transportation sector. Now, it's mostly not buses, right? It's usually individual cars and other things like that. But obviously, we are certainly part of the solution. We're part of the solution every day, but I think working together, we can get even further. So I'll hand this back over to David to talk about some of the existing conditions that they've taken a look at.
Right. So these are just the highlights. The report is being wrapped up and it's quite lengthy, but the key headlines here is, of course, over the last 10 years, as many agencies throughout the United States have experienced, ridership was on the decline, and the same goes for MTD. But over the last 2 years, there was a slight rebound in ridership, which is positive. And of course, COVID-19 with its impacts being felt in March 2020, April 2020, and so on. And during the worst of this COVID pandemic, MTD lost about 70% of its ridership. The lines that lost the most, perhaps not surprisingly, were the student ones, as a lot of the schools moved to remote learning, online learning. The lines that lost the least were really the workforce lines that give us some insight into the core routes, for example, the 1 and the 2, 14, the 6, 11, and the 20. And as the last point here has 4 lines, the 1 and the 2, the 6 and the 11, carry half of all passengers on a typical day. And I know I spoke with Hillary, and she probably has more info than I do, is that at last, October, I think numbers were somewhere around 80% back to what they were in terms of ridership overall.
Yeah, I don't have what it is overall, but I know that this October over last October, ridership was up 114%. So we did see as the campuses were opening. Of course, now they're sort of closed again, but we'll see what January numbers look like. But for August, September, October, we're seeing definitely rebound, especially out in the UCSB realm of folks starting to come back for sure.
Great. And then some of the mapping activities we did was to look at where and how many, or the density of transit critical populations who depend on transit, for example, car-free households. So those are households without cars that would typically rely on transit. And obviously you have some of those in the center of the city of Santa Barbara, Isla Vista, closer to UCSB, as well as some in Carpinteria. So these folks, public transit is an important mode for them to get around, as well as folks who are lower income, who also would rely on transit to a larger degree. And you can see some spread out throughout the service area, again, needing that transit. But when we start looking at in terms of access to transit for different populations, in terms of minorities and or low-income populations, that Title VI and equity concerns are, and service equity tend to look at, and we look at their access to bus service in terms of different tiers of frequency. So on the left, we see residents and jobs within a quarter mile of a transit stop based on different types of frequencies. So purple is 15 minutes or better frequency during the midday, red is 16 to 30, and so on. And then on the right is half a mile, which is about a 10-minute walk. Quarter mile is about a 5-minute walk, give or take. And what you can see is that coverage, especially in terms of when we look at the minority populations and the residents in poverty, is quite good to high frequency service. So MTD currently is doing a good job of providing that. Can we do better? Of course. When we start dissecting into it more and coming up with service concepts, we can look at ways to see if there's ability to bolster that service. But overall, when we look at the share of what folks who are potentially more dependent on transit, what they're getting is good relative to the population as a whole. Excuse me. And so again, we frequent transit is useful service because folks are able to get up and go and take a bus when they need it, but it has to be in locations that are supportive, dense locations, mixed use locations. And so when we look at this map that has more frequent service in red and the different colors or different tiers of service, so we can see that weekday service is concentrated around the 1 and 2, We know that the 6 and 11 are interlined so that you have that service that results in 15-minute service. But we've identified areas such as Saturday and Sundays to potentially increase service frequency along key routes to attract more ridership. So, but then again, it comes down to where and when do we invest in service and what are our priorities? As we saw from the research from the customers, folks are supporting that reorientation towards all-day service versus the peak service. And this kind of bolsters our thoughts around this is this COVID-19 impact. So the graph on the right shows ridership by hour of the day before COVID, so April or October 2019, and you can see those very distinct peaks at AM and PM. Whereas you can see on the right during the pandemic, those peaks, while there, are less pronounced and more comparable to the midday demand for transit ridership, although decreased overall. So it's a slow buildup during the day. So really rethinking that of when the peak service requirements. Of course, you want to alleviate crowding, you want to address school boosters. So, that will be there. But in terms of what we do for the evening, what we do for the midday, it's really important, especially when we consider who's riding the service and when they're riding. Right. So overall,
David, just
Yes.
go back on that graph. Okay, so the right is last year, April and October of 20. What's going on, Hillary, in 21?
Yeah, good question. So we, they were going up altogether, right? So sort of everything would be lifted on this. I think as far as the service that we've brought back, right? So in August with the City College return, right? We brought back the 15X and 16 to a certain extent. And then in the end of September, we brought back the 28. Those aren't, the 15X sort of is a little peaky, but for the most part, those are kind of throughout the day. As far as boardings by hour of the day, we haven't analyzed that for those months. It's sort of a very specific kind of data analysis. So we haven't done that, but I think probably by the end of all this, we will. So we'll actually have, 3 years worth to look at. But I think this was just to kind of show in the worst of the worst of the pandemic. So far, hopefully the worst, depending on how you define such things.
Yeah.
That's what it was looking like. But
And I hope we do get something by the end to see like what the rebound might look like, as to compare before and then, like you say, the worst of the worst. It'd be interesting to see the rebound. So
yeah,
hopefully we get there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
Just anecdotally, I read an article today about ridership rebounding in the subway in New York City, right? And it's a sort of similar pattern where the folks who have to go into work, that ridership is returned to a large degree. And then the folks who, like Wall Street Station, for example, is just not returned at all. So I would, and we have to look at the numbers, but I would guess that a lot of that peak is still blunted, compared to even before the pandemic, but probably to a lesser degree. But yeah, great question. Right, so ridership is returning with the resumption of in-person activities. Hopefully that continues, but we have this new variant to contend with. From our outreach, what we've heard is that the community favors frequent, direct, fast, all-day service. There's broad support for creating more roadway space for buses and its passengers, and most importantly. The MTD network currently provides good access to transit critical populations, as I mentioned, minorities and low-income populations. There's opportunities to provide better service on weekends and other off-peak hours while enhancing the customer experience, for example, speeding up buses, bus stop amenities, et cetera. And then opportunities to leverage ongoing community investments. So this is something that emerged from our discussion with stakeholder groups in terms of looking at opportunities to align with things like street design of State and Hollister to include bus priority measures, basically getting an MTD in there as there's redevelopment or redesign of certain roadways or certain intersections, et cetera, to incorporate this bus priority.
And just as we look at all of this, and as we move into our next phase of coming up with strategies and approaches, this is a 5-year plan that we're putting together. And the really hard thing about doing it right in this very moment is, of course, yes, people want frequent, direct, fast, all-day service. Me too. And at the same time, we're grappling with a workforce shortage that is impacted significantly by Omicron and by COVID in general. And so it's hard to look at this and go, yes, absolutely, and go like, no, that it's hard day to day to make the service that we have out on the street. So we're very conscious of that and thinking about this. And personally, for me, I'm trying to balance it of going, it's not always going to be this way. We have to hope, right, that it's not always going to be this way. And two, to be closer to realistic in what we're looking at. So anyway, so just know it's not all pie in the sky stuff for us as we think about this, but thinking about things as things change and improve, hopefully, we'll be looking at it in a measured way. And then lastly, next steps. We did our virtual listening session. We'll be taking all this information to work on the draft plan. We'll come back to you first with some of those approaches, then go out to the community to get some feedback on that, some more concrete stuff in the spring, probably in April. And just a note for the board, traditionally we'd be going out to the public in April to talk about annual service changes. And that would be like the thing we're talking about. In an effort to be more efficient, I think when we go out in the spring, we'll combine that with this to talk to folks. And I'll be back to you next month to talk about our service plan for the year. But anyway, so just wanted to note that we'll be probably combining those items. And then hopefully we put something final together that the board can adopt later in the year. Thank you. Happy to take any questions you have, and thanks, David, for all your work.
Great. Thank you both for a very informative presentation. I found it quite helpful. Opening it to the board. Anyone? Jen, Director Limburger.
Two questions on the access. So are they in a quarter mile or a half mile of stops? Are we using radius or street path, like walking path, to determine that?
Good question.
Yeah, you want to take that, David?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's radius. So it's like as the crow flies. So yeah.
Because then I would be interested in what walking path looks like, because some people are weird. Santa Barbara Street, someone could technically be in half a mile, but it's one of those like, I'm on the east side and I have to do this roundabout, like
Right.
actually at the end. So I would be curious.
Right. I need to double check that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would
That's a
be.
good point.
And then on the boardings, the weekly boardings, I'm curious if we've ever done a by percent seats available instead of just also numbers, so we could see both of those side by side. I imagine it tracks similarly of at peak hours we're at a higher percentage than the others, but I'd be curious as to what that looks like side by side to see capacity along with numbers that are riding.
Question. Yeah, we can take a look at that, and the data that we have with our automated passenger counters that can sort of give us that information. We're trying to make sure those are totally dialed in, that we 100% believe those numbers all the time, because it's technology, which is fun. So, but yeah, that's a good question, because we have different capacity on different lines, I would say.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Director Prodi, Paula.
Thank you, Chair. I have received several calls from folks that attend the Islamic Community Center as well. And I'm just curious to, I think part of the problem, and I'm wondering how far you were able to get information from them, how deep you went with them as far as, is it parking or is it they just want to be able to use a bus, some kind of and not drive. And how would that micro transit work for them? I know it's a problem, but I'm wondering what would be the best solution for that problem, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, parking hasn't been mentioned as a thing. I think people just want an easy way to get there. And there's a decent sized population in Isla Vista and at UCSB that would like to get over there. And so that's, I think, again, based on all those maps, right? People less likely to have access to a car. And so, yeah, that was the impetus for having those conversations, right? About we want access, because right now, right, there is not fixed route access to that area. And so how would microtransit work? The great thing about that is it would be, I think we've talked before about where the zone or, the portions of the zones are. And part of that is one on El Colegio and Isla Vista, one at UCSB, or two at UCSB actually, at Ealing's Hall and at North Hall. And then other parts of Goleta, neighborhoods and Kyriel and things like that. So being able to pick people up and take them there in a more flexible manner, right? Than sending a bus through there every half hour.
Thank you, Hillary. That answers my question. Thanks.
Yeah.
Director Tabor, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Other than physical distance to a bus stop, there are also other physical barriers to getting to a bus stop. And I'm thinking one being a Mesa resident and having quite a bit of older folks living on the Mesa. Just getting from the south side of Cliff Drive to the north side of Cliff Drive is quite a task, other than just putting your head down and hoping for the best. So I hope that's on the list of things we're talking to the local communities about when we're sitting down in those discussions.
Yeah, well, that specific one is, the city of Santa Barbara applied for an active transportation plan grant to address Cliff Drive for pedestrian bikes. I mean, really a tremendous project, a very long extent, right? They've got the Las Positas and Modoc, project that is almost done, and then they need to connect that up with more access on Cliff Drive itself, all the way to City College, and actually all the way down to Castillo. So they had a project, they applied and got had they gotten one more point, they would have been funded. It looks like in the governor's budget this year, there's going to be a big boost to that program. And so I would imagine that someday that will get funded, and it does acknowledge the, safer crossings and things like that across Cliff Drive, which has been obviously an issue for a long time, since well before it was even a city facility, right? It was a highway less than 10 years ago. So it's been a transition for sure. But to that end, talking about pedestrian, bike and transit access, right? For us, pedestrians are our customers, right? Everyone's a pedestrian until they get on the bus, right? So that is something that's very important that I know we're connected in with the jurisdictions on, because it's often our riders who are, traversing these roadways before they get to us.
Anybody else?
I had a question.
Go ahead, Chuck. Director McCoy.
In your surveys, did anything come up about passenger safety needs, like safe bus stops, and you mentioned crossing the street, but I just wonder if we're asking too much if we ask people about what would make them feel safer taking the bus, because I know we have a lot of people that are a little more vulnerable than others. And I just wonder if we have any kind of input on anything that we can do to make people feel safer in using the bus.
Good question. We didn't have a specific question about that. We did have an open answer at the end of anything else you want to tell us. And I don't know, David, if you noticed in that anything pop out. I haven't read all of those answers yet, but
nothing comes to mind. I'd have to look a bit closer. But I do think that that's a general theme, that we do have to address. And the tricky part there, as Hillary mentioned, is that a lot of that's not under direct MTD control, unfortunately, right? In terms of sidewalk or crossings or what have you, but it's definitely a crucial part. And I think a lot of the folks too, when they mention safety, perhaps at the time are referring more so to COVID safety on board the bus and that kind of approach. So it's a bit challenging at this point in time if that takes priority for some folks. So yeah, great question.
Yeah. One thing I will note though, Chuck, and this is actually specific to Carpinteria, we've got a test site out at Villarreal and Night Ever, where we have a solar light at that bus stop because it's just a pole in the middle of, no infrastructure, basically, no street lights. And that's been pretty well received. And so just testing things out like that, because safety at bus stops means all kinds of things, right? And being able to be seen, especially in those more rural stops, is really important.
Thank you.
Good question. Director Sarkar, Arjun.
I was just thinking of maybe what your thoughts were on that all bus loading question and the feedback you got from the drivers in terms of safety and what your guys' thoughts are on it.
Yeah, so all door boarding, it's certainly, we're not the first ones to come up with the idea, right? It happens in a lot of places, especially with longer buses with a lot of, when you got a lot of people to stop, you got to board. I know SFMTA, if Muni does it, there are a lot of considerations to figure out, right? And in cities where they're doing it, they've got, not a fare box at every door, but they've got maybe a more widely adopted tap to pay system, right? So if you get on at the back door, right, you're not paying cash, you're tapping your contactless payment card, or in a lot of those cities, they have like a, plastic smart card that's specific. That's something we obviously don't have fully deployed right now. And so I think it can be a little harder to kind of get our minds around that. But I think that's, passengers, from the passenger perspective, they're like, yeah, that'd be great. I don't want to wait behind these 20 people to get on the bus. But obviously it's a little more complicated than that. So that's, yeah. Jerry, did you have something to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think this is why this particular issue will go through our PTASK process. For example, if you've got a particular stop where you have a large number of folks trying to board, makes a lot of sense to consider this and have the roadway adjusted accordingly, which we don't necessarily control. That's one thing. But for a fixed route service with over 800 or 700 bus stops out there, it becomes a little bit more problematic, especially for those folks in our community who have mobility issues and are challenged. And there are plenty of folks that, with walkers that we serve, for example, that maybe don't rely on a wheelchair. Just the fact that the bus kneels is sufficient for them to access the bus. But when you introduce a second entry point, that could be problematic. So this is a very complex issue that we're going to have to look at. I'm glad you brought it up, Director Sarkar. It's what I was alluding to earlier. This particular issue, I mean, I love the all-door boarding concept, but in practice, I think we've got a long way to go to think of it across the board. I think it's going to have to be very specific, and then you have to consider the infrastructure that you're putting onto every single vehicle in the fleet, sustaining that, and what the benefit of it is. So there's a lot of work to go, but it's great to get that input and to find out what the public and our bus operators have to say about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and most jurisdictions that have it, they don't have it on all the lines, right? They're not opening that back door to load folks. So things like the 28 or whatever, where we just have a glut of people trying to get on, right? But not like the 14, right? Those things don't make as much sense. And yeah, we don't have nice loading areas at all doors, right? And throughout the system. So there's a lot to consider.
Well, thank you for the feedback.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you for a very informative presentation. Good luck in the next phase. We're going to look forward to the results coming back to us in the spring on the draft plan. I hope our public participation even increases as we go forward, get out of this current Omicron kind of surge and people feel normal again. Hope for the best. Thank you, David. Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chair Davis, just noting that there was no public comment.
Thank you for that, for the record.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to the general manager's report, item 9.
Yeah, I'd like to begin by really something I didn't necessarily put into the GM report, but I think it's critical is, what's happening currently with the state of our service. We've had a lot of service disruption due to the really the surge with the Omicron and the COVID pandemic. I don't think that's a surprise. We're doing our best. And I want to say thank you to all of our employees, from the bus operators to the management team and maintenance, to keep the buses rolling and get as much service as we reasonably can out throughout this surge. I think they're doing a great job. Hillary and her team are doing all they can to communicate, the impacts on a daily basis. And, we've made the decision at this stage to not just simply reduce service to, for example, Saturday or Sunday service, instead, day by day, to go through and make adjustments as needed to so that we can keep the service where it's needed the most each and every day. And that's a lot of work for our operations team down there. And I think they need to be recognized for that, and our bus operators who are stepping up. And I will finally like to thank the leadership at Teamsters Local 186 for their support throughout the entire pandemic. They've been great partners working with us to try and keep everybody as safe as we can. So that's really what I think the most important thing in my general manager's report is, or should have been. Sorry I didn't get it in there written, but it's been a busy few weeks. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the report.
Any questions from the board, or is there any public comment? Christina?
No public comment. Thank you, though.
Okay, I don't see anything from the board. Thank you, Jerry, for the report. That's going to take us to a series of closed sessions. It's going to take me a few minutes to read all of these, so hang on. Item 11, this is a recess to closed session regarding real property at 4678 Carreal 149 North San Antonio Road. Agency negotiators, General Manager Jerry Estrada, District Outside Counsel Graham Lyons. The negotiating parties are Con Am Group, a negotiation of price and terms of payment. Item 12, this is a recess to closed session conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 regarding anticipated and existing litigation. Jose Barrientos Lopez versus Santa Barbara MTD, Santa Barbara Superior Court case number 21CV04844. Next is Veronica Sanchez versus Santa Barbara MTD, anticipated litigation. Next is Catherine Morrissey, Juanita Lopez versus Santa Barbara MTD, Superior Court case number 21CV02426. Next, Maria Daniel versus Santa Barbara MTD, Santa Barbara Superior Court case number 21CV00253. Next is Gloria Bravo de Ayala and Santiago Ayala Cesares versus Ara Leticia Majangos, Santa Barbara MTD et al., Santa Barbara Court case number 20CV02349. Next closed session is a recess to closed session and conference with labor negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6. Agency designated representatives, MTD General Manager Estrada, Chief Operating Officer Mary Gregg, Employee Organization International Brotherhood of Teamsters Union, Local 186. Next, item 14, a recess to closed session and conference with labor negotiators, Government Code Section 54957, subsections B1 and 54957.6. The agency designated representatives, MTD General Manager Estrada and Chief Operating Officer Mary Gregg. The item is unrepresented employees performance review. Lastly, item 15, a recess to closed session, public employee performance evaluation pursuant to Government Code Section 54957 and Section 54954.5 subsection E to evaluate the performance of the district's general manager. Madam Clerk, is there anyone wishing to speak under public comment on any of those items?
I don't have any public comment.
Great. We will stand adjourned into closed session and we'll reconvene when we're through with the series of closed sessions that we have here. We'll take a 5-minute break and reconvene here in 5 minutes.
And at this time, I'd like to ask any members of the public to exit the session, please.
Right, there you go.